Excellent. So here we are today.
Here we are.
And we're talking about future digital advertising. We're here at the Brand Safety Summit. Appreciate the opportunity to chat. You were first up, so Rasco trusted you to kick off the performance today. Give us, in your own words, sort of where you're thinking about brand safety as here we are in November 2024. Where does that fit in a macro view? And then we'll bring it down to agencies and advertising.
So look, brand safety got started, as you know, in a real big way when the Times ran that headline that you know well, big brands fund terror, right? And everybody paid attention and went, oh my gosh, what have we done? And I think the idea of brand safety is a really important one and a legitimate one, which is that if you're a brand, it is absolutely, in my view, your right to know where your ads are running. And I think this concept of transparency around where my ads run is critical and is important. Now, the challenge is that the technology we use to evaluate where your ads are running and how we tell you what environment they're in, and then how we give you controls to decide, do I want to be here or there, is the sort of area that I think we've not done as good of a job with as an industry.
And I think you've shared some information in that case study from Taylor Swift and Time, showing that even industry third-party measurers end up with what was that swing at, 6% to 85%?
Literally, so exactly the same content, on precisely the same content, 4 different vendors evaluated it completely differently for brand safety. One said it was 6% unsafe. Another said 85% unsafe. You think about...
That's a hell of a delta.
That's a pretty big delta.
That's not a margin for error, is it?
What are you actually saying in that case? So you're just saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the challenge I have...
So how's that good enough?
Yeah. It's not.
But aren't those big players basically nearly all contracted to the major marketers and the members of WFA as being their...
the 2 largest brand safety companies are big, and they're enormous. They're big public companies.
Oh, and just are they part of those 4 that had the swing from 6% to 85%?
They are part of those 4.
We're not going to name which one's which.
I'm not going to name names just because I don't think it helps anybody. But
it's interesting to say within that you're using the industry standard. You got a 6 to 85% swing,
including the top 2 companies. Here's something else that I think is important and interesting. So the Media Rating Council, which I actually think is an important organization, it's been around for 50, 60 years, and everything's transparent. They publish, here's the guidelines, here's what you have to do, and it's sort of clear for anyone to go read. And so if you pull up the 2018 guidelines for brand safety at the content level, it says you have to evaluate, shocking, the actual brand safety at the content level. All right, that makes sense. I was surprised to find out that neither of the top 2 brand safety companies are currently MRC accredited for the content itself, what's called content level brand safety. And so what does that mean? What that means is that their accreditation for brand safety is at the property level. Mm-hmm. So property would be a domain, as an example, not the actual content.
Could be the New York Times, or it could be Rose and Rosie.
Or it could be YouTube. Yeah. Right? And so if you're asking...
Could it be at a platform level?
Absolutely, because that's a website, a domain like youtube.com.
Okay.
And so the question I would have is, how are you doing brand safety in an environment if you're not actually measuring the content itself? And so, they may be actually measuring it, but they're not MRC accredited at the content level. And so I think that's an important distinction, and I think people don't understand that. Now, there's a broader conversation here, which is that we've moved from a fragmentation world that you and I are probably roughly in the same age range. We still remember when there was newspapers and magazines, and you picked what show you were going to be on and what time, and you knew all of that. That world changed, but in a way that I don't think we fully appreciated. The fragmentation of content has created a massive tail of content, millions and millions and millions and millions of pieces of content on an individual campaign. And so as a result, brands literally have no idea where their ads are running. And so I think that creates a challenge, but it also creates an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. I think you and us were running in parallel paths. We're both going, old-fashioned keywords, rubbish, the travesties that have happened through with overblocking. We're also probably both going, okay, I've got to look at an individual video level, piece of content level. I can't look at either a channel or a URL level. I have to look at an individual piece. And within that, you're probably going, I want to have image recognition. I want to have some semantics. I want to have some positivity scoring. I probably want corrected keywords and maybe some IAB matching. So those are the things we're putting in place. And I think we're very much in a sort of parallel path there to try and get that more rounded view of what's in the content.
So let's take news as a category. So big category. All of us, most of us read news on a daily basis. Whether we want to go look for it, some of us do. Some of us are news junkies. Some of us just get it in our feed and get it all over the place. All right. So how do we evaluate news? Is it just a big category, news, or do we have nuance? So for example, can you distinguish between opinion-driven news versus fact-based reporting, as an example? Can you distinguish between this has come officially from the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or whoever, or this is from somebody just wrote it and published
There's a view from there's a view that we've had in discussions with some of the networks going, there's one thing that goes in news org, and you may have a view of CNN versus Fox. And then there's a view that then says, but actually it's at a journalist level within the channel, and then the level we think it is actually at the actual individual news article level. And you've got to be at this level, which is otherwise you're making assumptions and you're going, aggregate, it doesn't work. So when you talk about nuance, in our belief, it's video level classification.
Look at this content through a lens of someone who reads content like this and evaluate it in this way. That's a very complex way of looking at content that a human can do easily, but machine learning has had a challenge with that historically. AI and large language models now introduce a new ability to do that.
Looking at the individual artifact news, whether it's JGC, like journalist generated content, versus UGC user generated, going individual video and then going, okay, if I'm Ben and Jerry's, there may be some quite polarizing topics, but actually it's part of my belief system. So I'd actually like to lean into those. If I worked with Sylvia Lagnado and Dove for many years, and it's like there are topics that would count as sensitive social topics, which would be excluded. But when you look at a Dove brand, you're going to go, yeah, that's actually relevant to me. If I'm Unilever corporate, I have a different requirement. So I think the level that the agencies and the clients need is for people like us to be able to categorize this world at that level of specificity on an individual.
We need to provide transparency. This should be up to the brand to decide. And so it is literally their money. They get to decide where their ads run.
And I think that point's a really, it's their money. I'm not going to go all sort of First Amendment, freedom of speech stuff, but there is no issue of collusion. There's no issue of antitrust. A brand is making a choice where to spend their money.
But by the way,
self-determination,
on this point, which is an important one, because somebody was considered, problematic for one brand, doesn't mean that they should be for every other brand either.
Correct.
These folks can never get out of that bucket, and so I think we also have to be honest with ourselves that this concept of like, well, okay, we're going to
score for all.
One score and that's it. It's not a fair approach for either side.
I think giving the audience a view of sort of where we'd go on that one. A great example is women on the beach in bikinis. You look at a video, and at the moment, most of the systems out there would categorize that as safe, but probably unsuitable. I would argue that if I'm in a Middle Eastern country, it's actually unsafe. It doesn't even meet the brand safety floor. If I'm in a Western country, it's safe, but it may not be suitable for a conservative brand. It actually may be safe, but random for a sports brand. But if I was doing beach volleyball kits for Nike, it's actually safe and suitable. And so I think we've got to really get what's the safety floor, and depending on the brand, the audience, and the jurisdiction, you've got different applications. And so multiple, it shouldn't be one score. It's almost dynamic, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Depending on the brand.
It should be custom.
The brand, the place.
And I would say we can't sidestep context. I mean, look, in the end of the day, you have to look at it within context. And so you can isolate anything. Are you okay being around content that talks about nuclear war? Yes or no? I would imagine you're going to say no if you're running a brand. Now, if the content I'm talking about is highlighting, for example, Sam Altman and the work that he's done at OpenAI, and the statement that
our own decks,
that look, AI has perhaps existential risk
to humanity.
Absolutely,
it's a great headline.
And so, in context, no issue with that. I think we've misinterpreted, mischaracterized, misunderstood context, and I think that we need to start bringing context back into the discussion.
When I talk about semantics, one of my favorite examples is. You're probably not an Eagles fan, but if you were...
I was born in Philadelphia.
Okay, you're a Philly guy. Okay, so Emmanuel Acho. So Emmanuel Acho is great channel, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, New York Times bestselling author. Love it, love it. He had this interview with Barack Obama. Do you remember him? First ever black president?
I do, yeah.
And it's funny that the interview was how to cure racism. You would think that everybody should see that. and it should be monetized, it should be shared. No, on most systems it's deemed unsuitable because the machines see the word racism.
Yeah.
They don't see how to cure. They don't put it in the context of the first black
That's right.
president
Missing
talking to a
context.
a youth icon.
Yeah.
And they miss that. So when you talk context, that's what you mean, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
having the more rounded view of what's
Absolutely.
in the video.
And I think
and then
that-
you make a choice.
And I think in reality, I think that we're all so concerned about this idea of a screenshot that we go, oh my gosh, if somebody gets a screenshot, then the world's going to end. And the reality is, pair that with the fact that we have a fragmented content world where there's billions of pieces of content that these ads are showing up on everywhere.
Yep.
It is not the case. It is not the case of 30 years ago where you chose to be in that specific magazine, on that specific TV show, in that specific newspaper, and you better be sure that that's the kind of environment you want to be around. It's just not that anymore. We're in a fragmented world, and
You got to play the numbers. It is the law of big numbers.
it is absolutely the law of big numbers, but context matters.
So I think that just to wrap this up and sort of share, we really appreciate the view because I think we come from different paths, but we've both got to the same point. Context matters. You got to understand at a granular level what that content's talking about, and the way it manifests and whether it's relevant, whether it's random or it's risky, depends on every individual client in a campaign.
Yeah, and
So our job is to make it granular enough that people can make informed choices.
absolutely. And I'll give you one more that's not on the negative side of this world, which is context can also be a positive idea. And so the idea of what is going to amplify my story? Where does my brand message align? Not just how do I avoid bad stuff, but how do I find joy and love and happiness and
that's
positive
untaking
sentiment
relevance.
or whatever it is that somebody wants to reach. And so
Yeah.
I think we have to start asking questions about emotion and about all sorts of new ways of looking at content. And I think we'll get to a good place.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, positivity, believability, engagement scores is all part of this sort of evolution. So I think we've gone from the crawl to the walk. And I think together we can take a run and lead the industry
Let's
on
hope.
ever better understanding of content to drive brand performance while mitigating any brand risk. With that, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for
Appreciate
having
it.
me.
Thank you.